When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Helen's Tomb. User: XMM1Nex. Posted March 1st, 1999.
Walk around the thing 3 times, knock twice, saying her name, and supposedly the door will open as if Helen is welcoming you into her tomb. That's the urban legend we all heard growing up. Oh, and also that if you listen closely at night, sometimes you can hear her giggling from inside her mausoleum, like she's playing or something. We heard this at school buses, at bonfires, during sleepovers, where someone always pretended to be brave enough to try it. The kids would dare each other, but nobody ever really stuck around long enough to finish the ritual. Except Kara. She was obsessed with that story. Said the mausoleum had a pull. That's the exact word she used. Pull. Like Helen wanted her to visit. I thought it was just a game she played to scare me, but Kara wasn't playing. She would stand in front of that marble tomb for whole minutes, whispering Helen's name like a secret, like she expected someone to answer. That was 2 years ago. 2 weeks back, Kara went missing. Her car was found at the edge of Potter's Hollow, parked neat in the gravel like she meant to come back. Doors locked, her Walkman and purse still inside. No tracks, no clues. She'd just vanished. Cops shrugged, said she probably ran off with someone. They had no idea how small she made herself after her parents split, how much she craved stillness, routine, quiet. Kara didn't run. She waited. And I think she waited for Helen. I found a notebook stuffed behind the radiator in her room. The pages were warped, the ink smudged in places. Inside were clippings from the County Historical Society. Birth records, old photos, even a deed showing that the Ward family once owned the entire hill behind the cemetery. There was also one Polaroid. It was the mausoleum door, open, not wide, just enough to show black beyond the seam. The leaves around it looked fresh, and Kara was in frame, half turned toward the camera, wearing the green hoodie she had on the day she disappeared. That is when I stopped believing it was a coincidence. So last night, I went to find her. The air was sharp enough to sting, and the sky was choked with clouds. I parked behind the cemetery gate and took the trail in alone. No flashlight, just my Zippo and a pocket full of matches. My boots snapped twigs with every step. By the time I reached the tomb, my hands were stiff from cold. The structure sat on its rise, 2 columns flanking a door of solid stone. The inscription at the top had eroded around the edges, but the name was still readable. Helen Grace Ward, 1813 to 1821. Grass around the base had been flattened recently. There were heel prints in the mud, shallow but still visible. Someone had been there recently. I walked around the tomb 3 times, knocked twice, said her name. Nothing. I stayed anyway. Then I noticed something caught in the seam of the door, wedged into the stone. A sunflower hair tie. Kara's. I reached for it, and the door shifted under my hand just slightly, just enough to let out a breath of stale air from within. The kind of smell you get from a house no one's lived in for 100 years. Stone, dust, and time. My pulse kicked. I pulled the door open. It didn't creak, it groaned, deep and slow, and I had to use my shoulder to push through. The lighter in my hand flickered, barely enough to cut the dark. The steps leading down were narrow, uneven. Everything was slick. The light from the little flame swept over the stone walls, marked with streaks that looked too deliberate to be water, like something had been dragged. At the bottom was a small chamber, and in the corner was Kara. She was curled up tight, head buried between her knees, arms wrapped around her body like she was holding herself in place. Her clothes were soaked through. Her face looked bruised by cold. I dropped down beside her. "Kara, hey, it's me. I'm here." She flinched hard, and then she looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot and wild, but her face changed when she saw me. She didn't say anything, just grabbed onto my coat like she was afraid I'd disappear next. I pulled her up, her legs barely held. We made it up the stairs slow, one careful step at a time, and I kept moving forward, breathing through my nose to ignore the rot. Outside, the trees barely moved. There was no sound but her breathing and my heartbeat. We got to the car, and I had to lay her down across the back seat and drive with the windows cracked to keep from gagging. She hasn't talked much since. Doctors said she was dehydrated, disoriented, possibly fugue state behavior, one guy mumbled, like he didn't even buy it. They said she must have wandered into an old cellar or storm drain and gotten stuck. But no one explains how she wound up inside a mausoleum sealed shut for over a century, or how the door opened from the inside.
Subject, Rodeo Cowboy. User, C0WP0K319. Posted, June 19, 2001.
My grandpa was a rodeo cowboy, and not just in name. Virgil J. Cotton was the kind of man who could hold a cigarette in his teeth while being thrown 30 feet by a bull named Widowmaker, and he'd still tip his hat to the crowd afterward. At least, and that's the story I grew up hearing. My dad used to say Grandpa was made of old leather and barbed wire, the kind of man you don't get anymore. Tough as a coffin nail, but soft-spoken, always soft-spoken. I never really knew him, not in the way I wish I had. By the time I was old enough to form memories, he was just a quiet figure on the porch, sipping instant coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, that big gray hat casting half his face in shadow. He didn't talk much, but when he did, It was worth listening to. The stories my father told always started the same way. Your grandpa met your grandmother outside a feed store. Said she'd dropped a sack of flour and it burst open all over her shoes, and instead of helping her clean it up, Virgil just said, "Ma'am, I reckon that's the whitest wedding dress I've ever seen." She laughed, and that was that. Married 6 months later, had 2 kids, settled down the best he could between rodeo circuits. Then, one afternoon, my grandmother went into town to buy thread and never came back. No accident, no note, just gone. Her car was found the next morning off a back road, trunk still locked, keys in the ignition. No damage, no sign of struggle, like she just stepped out and vanished into the dirt. My dad was 10, his sister was 7, and Virgil, well, something inside him buckled. He left the rodeo circuit not long after, sold his saddle, his trailer, even his prized belt buckles, packed the kids into a beat-up Ford, and moved him back to the family farm in Arkansas. The house was small, and the land had gone mostly to weeds, but it was quiet. He took a job fixing tractors for a local co-op, kept to himself, and then came Lenora. Lenora wasn't from around there. She showed up like a heat rash, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. Nobody knew what she did for work, but she always had money. Said her people were root workers out of Louisiana. My dad used to call her the widow in waiting. She was maybe 10 years younger than Virgil, tall and rail-thin, with a sharp chin and long black hair that always looked wet. People whispered she read fortunes and burned things in jars, that animals acted strange around her, that the preacher's wife crossed herself whenever she passed. Dad and Aunt Sandy, they hated her. Said she was always touching Virgil's shoulder when he wasn't looking, always whispering things to him like she was trying to plant words in his head. He stopped going to church, started sleeping in the barn, got real serious about keeping the doors locked at night. My dad said the worst was the smell, like burnt sugar and meat, especially around the old root cellar out back. They swore she used to go down there at night, barefoot, carrying little burlap bundles she'd bury in the dirt. Fights got worse as the kids got older. Aunt Sandy left first, ran off with a guy who worked at the cotton gin. Dad stayed longer, trying to protect Virgil, or maybe just waiting for Lenora to go, but Grandpa would not hear it. Said he'd already lost one love. He wasn't about to throw another away just because people didn't like what they didn't understand. But then there was the fire. It happened in the fall of '72. The house caught quick and burned fast. Dad said he woke up to the sound of glass breaking and the chickens screaming. He ran out barefoot, flames chewing through the roof. Virgil was outside already, still wearing that hat, just standing in the yard staring at the fire like he couldn't figure out what he was seeing. He didn't speak for 3 days after, just sat on the edge of his bed, fingers gripping the brim of that damn Stetson like it was the only thing holding him together. They never found a cause. The sheriff blamed faulty wiring. My dad blamed Lenora, said she was the kind to burn a place down on her way out of a man's life, or maybe to stay in it forever. Virgil never talked about it, and he never mentioned Lenora again. He even lived in the barn for the rest of his life, rebuilt it a little at a time, raised dogs, repaired fences, wrote letters he never mailed. He wore that hat every single day, even inside. Said it kept the weather off his thoughts. When I was about 16, I asked him why he never took it off, and he looked at me real quiet and said, "Sometimes when you lose too much, the thing that touched your head last is the only thing that still remembers who you were." That didn't make sense then, but it definitely does now. In his later years, he talked to himself more, had whole conversations in the dark. I'd hear him out in the barn murmuring like he was trying to soothe someone. Sometimes I even caught him crying, gently, the way old men do when they're too tired to be angry anymore. He died sitting in his recliner, still had the hat on. My cousin Reggie was the one who found him. Swore the TV had turned itself on and was playing nothing but static. Swore the hat was warm to the touch, like it had been out in the sun. Reggie took it with him. Said he was gonna sell it to make a few bucks, but he asked if I wanted it first, and I just said no.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.